I am so delighted to welcome onto the First Time Facilitator podcast, David Pullan. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Leanne, it is such a pleasure. This is actually only the second time you and I have spoken to each other, but I hope you feel the same. When we spoke for 20 minutes about a couple of months ago, I thought, hello, it's you. I've known you forever.
Likewise. And that's why I've can we please continue the conversation? And a podcast is as good as an excuse as anything. And even before hitting record, we're getting into some conversation. I'm like, David, just hold up.
Yeah, I know.
For those of those listeners who weren't involved in our 20-minute catch up where I found out a bit more about you, can you share a bit of your story and the work that you do today?
Yeah, sure. Without going through the whole CV, I actually grew up in Australia. I live in the UK and it's sort of 6 a.m. and the birds are starting to sing here and the sky's coming out. I've lived in the UK for about 40 years and I actually originally trained as an actor at NIDA in Sydney.
Wow.
And I know, which for Australians is a big deal. So I came over here and worked in the theatre for a long, long time. And then we may get into this later, we may not. I actually made the transition into the corporate world sort of by accident, really. And then I just really loved what I ended up doing, which was using story. And I call myself a story spotter now. Actually, that's a benefit of COVID and lockdown, is that name, the Story Spotters, has been the rebrand for me and my wife. We work together. And it's really about using story in 4 ways that we can get into, it's about helping people cut through the noise, because there's so much noise out there. And we use story to do that. It's the stories you tell, the stories you have to find and tell in a sort of Matthew Dixian sort of way. But it's also the stories you tell by your presence. So actually, I'm just basically running through your past guest list. It's the Mark Bowden. It's the it's the body language. What stories do you trigger through that? But then also, what stories do you hear in terms of conversation? And the last one, which I'm really interested in, is the stories that you tell yourself about yourself, which either help or hinder you. And so there are 4 elements of story there.
That is, any one of those elements could be an entire podcast, right?
Well, I know. I just love it. I love the fact that it's come, because to be honest, Leanne, until 3 months ago, we were called Pullan Limited. Which, what do they do? What does Pullan Limited do? And then suddenly we came across this name, the Story Spotters, and people are suddenly going, oh yeah, we need to know about that. So that's been a massive benefit.
Let's dive into that, David. And I do want to say, by the way, NIDA is a big deal. I did drama in year 12, and I remember my thespian friends who were that was the ultimate goal, to go to NIDA. So man, that's amazing. I also know, so Yuri, a mutual friend, and I, who you know as well, we heard you on Clubhouse the other day, and we're like, David's got such an amazing voice. You're also a voice actor. So if you're listening to this podcast going, that guy has amazing presence, just tell us a bit more about the voice acting before we dive into it.
Yeah, that's about the only acting I do now. So I do voiceovers, a lot of corporate voiceovers. I do some commercial voiceovers over here. And I think Yuri actually said I should be cast as something like a discombobulated stoat in a in a commercial. So if anyone's listening and they've got a role for a discombobulated stoat, get in touch with Leanne.
Yeah,
you'll only take 15%.
Yeah, that's right. I love that. Okay, I'll edit that out to say 30% when we actually go to air. Now, David, before we dive into stories again, I do want to pause on the rebrand. That has been a big part. Like you said, because of COVID, you sort of paused and reflected on your business name. There's a lot of newbie trainer facilitator business owners that listen to the show. Tell us more about how long, you said you've been in business for how long? 17 years?
It's 20 years now.
20
we incorporated,
Yeah.
Actually, it's 18 years. We incorporated in 2004, but I've been doing it. My wife and I have been doing it as sole traders before that. And how the business came about is a story in itself. But we've been in business as McKechnie Pullan since 2004.
And what really spurred the change to Story Spotters after so long of having that other brand?
Well, it was a very interesting one. See, as you can imagine, having been an actor all my life, and my wife, we met acting in actual fact. We've been doing what we've been doing all the time. And the story behind it is my wife had actually been working with the general counsel of a big insurance firm. And she went in for a debrief on this project. She'd helped her organize a massive event. So to help her, she was actually facilitating, this general counsel was facilitating the event. My wife helped her plan the event and how she was going to do it and all sorts of things. And she went in for a debrief, and this person said, do you know what, Sarah Jane, everyone's talking about story at the moment. I think I really need to talk to somebody who talks about story. And Sarah Jane said, you do realize that everything we did was about story. It was about the story, the narrative of that event. It was about the stories you told within it. It was the stories you got from people. I remember Sarah Jane running home, and I was cooking dinner, and she said, we got to do something about the name because no one has a clue what we do. And so what happened actually is during lockdown, I started doing I was helping a wonderful guy called Neil Bearden. You might be aware of Neil, who's very big on LinkedIn. He's about to stop actually. He's about to leave INSEAD in Singapore. He's a stats prof actually, but I mean, he teaches storytelling. And I was helping him facilitate some storytelling classes online during most of last year, in fact. And he'd only just met me, and he said, what do you do? And I said, well, the majority of my work is going into businesses and stopping them when they finally arrive at the story they need to tell, just talking to them, whether it's in a sales or a strategic viewpoint, and just talking to them saying, that's interesting. Let's see how we turn that into a story. And he went, oh, you're a story spotter. And I thought, now that's a cool name. So yeah, it just all came together, and we just figured out these 4 strands of story spotting that came about pretty much from that conversation with Neil, just so we did what we say on the tin.
It's interesting that you talk about story spotters and some of the elements, and you said that the stories that we tell ourselves, so you and your wife told yourself, like, we do everything about stories, but the stories that other people were telling about you didn't resonate with that because of the brand. So there was some disconnect there, so you've had that rebrand. So can you please share those 4 elements of story spotting and how we as facilitators can either unleash them in other people or use them in our own workshops as well to create a great experience?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, the 4 elements of story spotting, one is the obvious one, which is what are the stories that you need to spot, shape, and share, essentially, either, as an individual or as a business. What are the stories you need to tell? The second one is what are the stories that you are triggering by your behaviors? So it's by how you show up predominantly on screen now, but even in the room, because I mean, we make instantaneous decisions about people based on how they show up. So there's the stories that you tell through your behaviors. There's the stories that you get out of people, which I think for a facilitator is incredibly important. How do you actually trigger? Actually, one thing I haven't told you is we trained as cognitive behavioral hypnotherapists as well. So that's an element that comes into this third part, which is how do you get the stories out of people? How do you through conversation get those stories out? And then the last one, which is what are the stories you're telling yourself about yourself, which are either going to be beneficial or negative to your success. And so that's pretty much the noise in your head. I talked about there's a lot of noise, cutting through the noise. That's the bit of our work which cuts through the noise in the head.
Let's go through this in a sequential order. I'm keen to just jump into number 3, but I thought, no, Leanne, pace it. Like let's build up to
we got time.
So spotting these stories, like you said, you alluded to Matthew Dix, and he talks about homework for life, and just every day, at the end of the day, note something down that could have been memorable. And I've discovered some very average stories that actually have really interesting lessons in them. What's your advice for spotting the stories?
Oh man, I think I would be absolutely crazy if I tried to better Matthew Dix. I mean, it would just be, his 3 things. His 3 things are the homework for life. There's the homework for life. He also talks about free writing. He doesn't call it free writing, but the idea of just sitting down for 15 minutes and just getting that pen on the page and just getting it out of your head. I've done that because part of my degree was screenwriting and stuff, and so I did a lot of I did a lot of free writing just to sort of like clear the drains of my brain of ideas. But what I like is his thing of taking an object around you. So I've got there's a tripod sitting over there, and just write tripod, and then suddenly you're away. And I could that. Immediately, I'm taken to a story in my head about my father, who gave me terrible story, my very first DSLR camera, which had belonged to him. And I think he then claimed the insurance on it and told it had been stolen at Heathrow Airport. So, I think that there's a story there, but it's, and then the last one he does, which I think is a great exercise, first, last, best, worst. That exercise there about, you could be kiss, first kiss, last kiss, best kiss, worst kiss, or tin of baked beans. Whatever it is, whatever the subject is, just go, and you might not have 4 stories for each of them, but you might have a story about the best tin of beans you ever had around a campfire talking to your friends. I love that.
I can't remember the last can of baked beans, but my husband loves baked beans and I just avoid them. That's such a great sort of, it's funny when I talk to people that have read the same books as me, but you're highlighting things that I'm like, I know, but I've forgotten and I haven't brought back into my practice. So thanks for sharing that again.
Oh, no worries. I mean, I think anyone would be crazy to try and better Matthew Dix in terms of triggering stories in yourself and just connecting to your life. Because it's I often say to people, people always say there are no stories out there. There are stories everywhere. All you got to do is reach out and catch them as they, like with a baseball mitt, and just catch them as they fly past you. Because it's the same as opportunities. There are opportunities out there. You just got to see them as they fly by.
Oh, I love that. Love that metaphor for opportunities. Yeah, you're right. And I think the hardest part is when we need to facilitate a workshop and we need to grab a story about great communication and we're like scratching our heads trying to think of it. It's all that pre-work and stuff that you've accumulated to then make it easy for you to recall something in the moment. It's really hard to just pull something out of your hat.
Actually, that's interesting as you say that, just in terms of how you connect to, if I'm interpreting what you say rightly, there's a storybook by a guy called Doug Littman. It's probably published in the early, can't remember the name of it now. It's called something like Storytelling. He's an American, and what he has is this triangle that he refers to, and I think you could use this in terms of facilitation or indeed story. So the triangle he talks about, he has story at the top, he has the storyteller and the listener. And you've got to be constantly thinking, how are those things in relationship to each other? How is the storyteller in relation to the story? What does that story mean to them? How is the storyteller in relation to the audience? And how is the audience in relation to the story? And then similarly, this audience to story and story to audience. I think that that's a great model for a facilitator as well. If you think this is the subject we're talking about here, this is the audience that is talking about this subject, I am the facilitator. How are we all in relation to each other? And in terms of the subject, as we know, the best way to get people to understand things is tell stories. And, say your subject is diversity and inclusion. I mean, it's which seems to a lot of people are doing facilitating things on D&I at the moment. Mm-hmm. What is your story? I mean, even as a man of a certain age with a lot of gray hair, I will have stories about diversity and inclusion that I can easily drag out of the bag. So I think that's the thing is thinking about that relational triangle and what are the stories that you can find that connect you to the subject
and connect you to the listener. Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's and if you're not, if you are listening to this, we've also recorded this on video. So you can see David talking about this and actually outlining, mapping out what that triangle looks like. Let's move on to number 2, and triggering behavior and how you show up can affect people's judgment based on, that's so important. Like you said, in Zoom, we've got limited information to read from as well. So when I'm on these calls, I'm often, I think, a lot more animated than I would be in real life. I don't know, with you, David, I'm sure I'd be as animated in person. But like, well, what are your thoughts on that?
You're not always, otherwise you'd be crazy. I mean, you've got to have downtime, haven't you? But I mean, it's that, I can't remember what the film was. I think it was Fosse with, the old film about Bob Fosse. And I always remember him terrible, sort of, wreck of a man, looking at himself in the mirror and going, it's showtime. And I think, as a facilitator, you've got to, without faking it and without being sort of inauthentic or unauthentic, there is an element of it's showtime. You've got to be the energy that you want in the room. And what does that mean? And it's not about sort of, jazz hands and sort of, but it has to be authentic to you. But I think it probably has to be more than most people naturally would turn up with.
Yeah. Like a couple of notches higher than you probably would be without a group, perhaps. Yeah. And sort of putting that game face on.
Game face is a great way of putting it, actually. Yeah. There was a client of mine, actually, a couple of years back now, and she was the chief exec of a big hotel group. And she said to me at the end of the work that we'd done together, she said, the main thing that I've realized from working with you is that my job as a leader is to, in any room, is to read the temperature of the room and change the temperature of the room. Oh. And I thought, oh, thank you. I'm stealing that.
That is, yeah. Well, let's say, like the story that quote reminds me of is just when I go to early morning gym classes and the group instructor, like everyone, it's at 5:30 in the morning. Everyone is pretty much zombies. And so she comes in and then she just turns it around. She reads it and like, right, we're all tired. And then she just brings the energy with music and everything else. But it just reflects that quote. That's awesome.
I think it's a great one. And I always think about that as well. I mean, I can't, a lot of people have said it, and they probably said it on your podcast, indeed, is I think as a facilitator, as a coach, as probably as a human being as well. I mean, my attitude when I sort of go into situations is sort of, how can I make, I did a lot of improvisation, as you can imagine, with as an actor. And one of the major rules is make the other fella look good, make them look good. It's not about you, it's about making them look good. And I sort of go into situations thinking, how can I make this the best day or the best hour or the best 30 minutes of that person's life without being cheesy and sort of, horrible about it, but just actually making them think, oh, I've had a really good time.
I'm with you on that.
It's as simple as that.
That is the whole, actually, you've really nailed the philosophy of my podcast.
Oh,
and
well, you do it in spades.
Oh, I just love it. Yeah, but like, even when I've got an upcoming workshop and it's the client's like, how are we going to make this all virtual? They're not too sure how to do it. I'm like, don't worry, I shouldn't say trust me, but I did. I was like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. But we'll make it the best experience ever. And that's my benchmark for them. I want them to enjoy it, learn, communicate. I just can't wait to make that happen.
Totally. And there are days when you won't want to do it. There are days when you have to drag yourself. Have you ever come across that wording thing, which I love, which is, it'd be so easy, like at 6 o'clock in the morning, go, oh, I have to do a podcast with Leanne. And if you change have into get, I get to do a podcast with Leanne. How cool is that?
Yeah, I love that word change. Actually, another good reminder. You tell me things like, oh my gosh, I knew that, but I've got to start telling myself more of that.
That's my job. I just read the books and remind people.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so point number 3 of your framework was getting the stories out of people. Something that I've read podcast interviews should to do that was like an opening sentence, like, tell me about a time when ... Do you sort of throw away sentences like that to do it, or is it that?
Tell me about a time is a great one. I mean, it's sort of, I mean, that could even, you think of the subjects, the who, what, where, when, why, how stuff. I mean, if you ask well, actually, I'm going to give you the 4 of those that I think are really cool. The word when will automatically take people to a time. So when did you first notice that? Well, it was back in 2017. You automatically take people into a story, a hook for a story, because time and place. And so by the same, where were you when you first found out that you could do that? Well, I was back in Bar, and whatever it is. And you sort of, I dragged that one out of the hat. Best friends from Bar, yeah. But I mean, the time and the place drag people back to a story time. They are stories, what anecdote call story spotting questions. Actually, a time and a place. The other 2 is the where and the not the where. It's the how and what are the widest open questions. How do you think, how if you could wave your wand, what would good look like to you? And you'll see, it's a really interesting exercise, this. Use a how or a what question. I've never seen this fail. People's eyes go back. They go, and that's another one for you too, but it's their eyes go back as they start remembering or imagining. And from a hypnotherapeutic point of view, if you start getting people to imagine about what a solution will look like, they're less likely to prove themselves wrong than you wrong. So as a facilitator, if you say, do this, and they go and do it and it doesn't work, they say, well, David's a terrible facilitator. I mean, he's awful. But if you say, so what do you think the best solution for you might look like? Suddenly their eyes go back and think, well, I think I should do X, Y, Z, and then I'll add this on. And they're less likely to prove themselves wrong.
Magic. And that's the thing. It's like a lot of the time, like as a first-time facilitator, I thought I had to have all the answers for my audience and be so prepared. And now it's like, oh my gosh, a lot of that is just relinquishing control, giving them the autonomy to think about things, as you said. Amazing.
100% agree with that. And that's my number 1 top tip for any facilitator, is give yourself a break. You don't have all the answers. In fact, I tell you what, my opening line often in sessions is, after introducing yourself and introducing the topic, I often say to people, listen, don't let's not beat about the bush. There is a lot of knowledge in this room here. There is a lot of knowledge amongst you in that little horseshoe shape of people sitting opposite me, or that, table of screens in front of me. You probably know a lot of this and more than me, but you just haven't shared it. So let's actually get that out of you. And
awesome. I love and calling those objections early as well. And just setting the tone that this is going to be an environment where we get to share and collaborate.
I think that's what we are. I said to you before we started I think great facilitation is about being a connector. How do you connect people? How do you connect people? And this is the second time I'm speaking to Thomas Kraft in 3 hours' time, and that's because of you. And Kate and Yuri, and I've got a list of people. I mean, Leslie M. I mean, that's another one. I mean, there's the number of people I've met because of you. So you're a connector.
I love that.
So, I mean, as a facilitator, that's what we do. We connect people. We connect people's ideas.
Oh my gosh, this is so meta. The fact that you're like talking about facilitation and then you're connecting with other facilitators and through that demonstrating how great a facilitator you are as well. Love it, love it. On the content,
I love it too.
You mentioned Leslie, and I think this links into point number 4, which is that talk that you tell yourself. And she came on the show and talked about swagger and owning your power and who you are. And you mentioned briefly before that it's the voice, the things that you tell yourself that may be true or may not be true. That is so powerful. So how do we test those assumptions or stop listening to the stuff that isn't true? Like what are your thoughts on the 4th party framework? It's a big one.
Do you know Jimbo Clark? Have you ever met Jimbo Clark?
You've given me so many names. I'm not noting him down. No, I don't. Jimbo Clark.
Jimbo Clark. His name really is Jimbo Clark, and he's an American. He's lived in Taipei for about 30 years probably now. I'll introduce you to him later because he would be fantastic on this podcast. He has an organization called Integrate, INNO, and then the word great. And he does this thing. It's called unboxing. You may have come across unboxing. And what he does is he gets people, the box becomes a metaphor for your unconscious thinking, what's happening in your head. And then the outside of the box is what you present to the world. And in non-COVID times, he was traveling around all the time to places like HSBC and goodness knows where else, getting people to stick boxes on their head, and they'd paint faces on the outside, and they'd write stuff on the inside of, this is what I think, this is what the unconscious thoughts that are stopping me. I've trained is what he calls hack the box, which is basically unboxing with origami. And you get a piece of paper, and it's a process that lasts about an hour. And you fold this piece of paper into the shape of a box. And you take a situation you've got. So you might have a situation like, I feel nervous speaking up in meetings with senior people. And inside, there's a series of questions you ask. And on the 4 sides of the box, you go, so this is what I'm thinking. This is my goal. My goal is to speak up more in meetings. What do I need to stop? What do I need to start? What's the phrase that's going to remind me to do that? And then on the outside, what are the behaviors that will change? And through the process, you think to yourself, what am I doing now? Through the conversation, you unpack that thinking, and then you repack it into a new box, which is going to be, it's a more beneficial way of thinking. So it's a sort of basic coaching model, but because it's so physical, people are doing. It's amazingly the results are extraordinary. He's a great guy.
Yeah, look, that sounds amazing. I love that activity because it is very tactile. I was even thinking, you could even run it virtually and get everyone to make their own box. And
I do. I have done, absolutely. Yeah. And literally, it's a piece of A4 paper that you get people to fold, and it's great.
It's so great.
I'll put you in touch with Jimbo.
Oh, please do. Yeah. So listeners, look forward to that. We'll be hacking the box.
I owe you at least one. I've got a huge list of people you put me in touch with, so I owe you one.
Yeah, happy to help. And if you're listening to the show, please connect with David. We'll put a link to his contact details in the show notes.
Thank you.
David, I have to talk to you about your voice. I said you're a voice actor. It's a very important asset, particularly, all the time, but with virtual as well. Audio is such an important part of the way that we present. And I've certainly been on meetings where it's funny, I'm using a microphone, but I still feel like I need to project my voice. And at the end of the day, I can get pretty run down. It sounds a bit scratchy. Yeah. What are your tips for facilitators in extending the life of their voice?
it is the breathing, actually. But a lot of it is, I mean, I'll be honest, I used to teach voice to business people, and it was hopeless because they're not going to go away and do the exercises that I did at NIDA, because at NIDA I was there for 3 years, sitting in front of a voice teacher, and it becomes part of your system. Other people have real work to do, so they're not going to be doing sort of bada and breathing exercises. But the reality is, a lot of it starts with just how you bring yourself. I mean, I love the words, find your inner UFO, which is upright, forward, and open. And upright is just unlock your body. I mean, use that core so that there's length between your hips and your lower ribs. It's a bit like a garden hose. If you're slumped over, then the breath can't get in, it can't get out. And it's like a garden hose, the water wouldn't get out. So get upright, get forward as well. I think that gesturing towards the screen, getting that energy forward, because we spend a huge amount of energy holding ourselves back sometimes, I think, as facilitators, as human beings, we're sort of testing the water. And if you just get forward, it's interesting doing that. I can almost feel the air and the energy getting out more. And then open is just get your shoulders open. I mean, get your shoulders open, allow the space, take up the space that you deserve to take up. I mean, it's not arrogant. It's a gift to people to see somebody who enjoys being in space. So yeah, find your inner UFO, upright, forward, and open.
Oh, that is so easy to remember as well. It's funny, when I was recording my podcast intro, I think it was last week, I thought something was wrong with the microphone because the audio levels, like the wavelengths, were really narrow, and then the volume wasn't working well. And then I've got a stand-up desk, so I moved to standing, and the microphone was fine. The audio levels were perfect. My posture just changed, and that created, I could see the movement in the waves, which
I love stand-up desks. I'm sitting today because it's too early and I've got my cup of tea here, but my stand-up desk is right there, and it's great. It makes such a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So with, I mean, you've been doing this, like I said, for 20 years. What keeps you motivated? I know that you had change last year, and did you feel like just going, like, why are we bothering? We've got to pivot again. What keeps you and your wife going?
What a great question. Because I have to go shopping every Friday.
We do forget that it's work, right?
But there are other reasons in that as well. I mean, I think that it's sort of the reason why I came into this in the first place is because I genuinely like walking out of a room feeling that I've helped people. I mean, as an actor, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great job. I mean, it's when you're doing it, that's the issue. When you're doing it, it's a great job. And, you do entertain people, but it's essentially a selfish job as well. And I think that with coaching, facilitation, connecting people together, I mean, I love connecting people, even if there's nothing in it for me financially. I mean, it just sort of saying, oh, you should meet such and such, and just putting people together. I mean, I do love that idea of having helped and connected people and just moving the world on in my own small way. And the other thing that keeps me going is I suppose it comes back to that thing of there's knowledge out there in the room. Every single session, I'm no spring chicken, you're looking at me now, but I mean, every single session, I learn something. Every day I learn something. Every group teaches me something. And if you wake up and you haven't learned something that day, then why did you bother waking up?
I think it is, there was a poll in the Flipchart Facebook group, and it was, I put the video too, there's a TED talk about multi-potentialites, and these people that really enjoy variety and don't like to be, they want to generalize in their field. And I put a poll up saying, would you identify as a multi-potentialite? And I think like 100% of the people, apart from Yuri, I think he was just taking the piss, said no. 99% of people, 99% of people said yes. And I was like, oh, so I think it really is, as at that point, every day is really different. And it's great. If you like variety, this is like the ultimate career.
Yeah. It's just the best. And it comes back to that thing of listening. I mean, the real importance of listening as a facilitator and spotting those things that fly by you, because every session teaches you something. It teaches you about the way human beings tick, or that UFO one. That's a really good example.
Yeah.
It was at PwC. It was years ago. I wasn't describing it like that. And I was working with a bunch of directors who were going for partners, and this one guy actually said, oh, you've got to find you. I was describing it. totally other way. And this guy said, oh, find you were in a UFO. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, my wife's about to have a baby and she goes to the antenatal clinics and they always talk about when you're giving birth, you want to find you in a UFO. And I thought, I'm stealing that 100%. And that is going into how you explain how to get your body in terms of in the right position to help your voice get out. And so you learn a different way of explaining things or whatever. I mean, I love it. I love
it. The inspiration comes from, birth classes. Like, of course, like if that was the only place to get breath tips from, it would be from there. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Dave, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners, the first-time facilitators, people that own their businesses? I mean, you've mentioned your advice earlier, but if you've got any other tips?
That's a great one. What's my tips? You got to be brave. You've got to be brave when you're setting out. It's actually, do you know what? This is where my acting career comes in, because I was a relatively successful actor for about 20 years, but that has inbuilt redundancy. Every 8 weeks you finish doing a job and that you are looking for the next one. And I think as a facilitator, especially if you're an independent, a sort of solopreneur sort of facilitator, which I suspect a lot of your listeners are, and a lot of people are on the Facebook group, you've just got to be brave and just get out there and keep finding that thing about what is it that keeps you going, your why. I mean, to go Simon Sinek on it, it's and for me it's just, I love being with people. I love learning from people. This has been, I mean, Leanne, I mean, this last year, I mean, that 20-minute call you and I had, I mean, I've said to a number of people, the great thing about this year is in a year of not very good things, is finding your tribe. I genuinely, I've had conversations with people. I know I'm going to speak to Thomas Kraft later and he'll go, oh, it's you. I know you. You speak the same language as me. And it's so get out there, meet different people, speak to people in the same job. The pie is big enough for all of us. That's my advice. People who get a bit sort of protective of that, share stuff like you do on the Facebook group. Just brilliant. The pie is big enough.
That exactly the whole premise of the show is like, what works, let's share it and make just like, I'd like just creating a global movement where workshops are actually engaging and people love them, that changing that brand of what people initially think. I think we're all sort of workshop warriors on that.
Workshop warriors, love it.
Warriors.
I'm getting that tattoo.
Yeah, that's right. David, if our listeners would love to connect with you, you are all about connection. Where should they go?
Well, LinkedIn, I am David Pullan on there, but we also have a company page, the Story Spotters. You can do that. That's basically it. I mean, the website, obviously, thestoryspotters.com. Interestingly, if you want to follow us on Twitter, which actually is just honestly quite often a link from, but that's at McKechnie Pullan, McKechnie Pullan. I actually call it the Story Spotters, but the handle is still at McKechnie Pullan, because that happened pre-rebrand. Yeah, exactly. We don't do Facebook actually. I mean, but we do or Instagram. But yep, LinkedIn definitely. The Story Spotters. I'm David Pullan. Love to connect with people.
Amazing. We'll put a link to all of that in the show notes. I hope you weren't driving and taking note of the Twitter handle. That will be in the show notes too. It's funny when you rebrand, like all those moving pieces that you realize, this and this is so much.
I know. It's exciting though, isn't it?
It is exciting. I love that you're reinvigorating the brand.
Thank you.
You think it comes to a stage where it's like, I get to look like rest on the laurels of this, but you're putting more energy into it, which I find amazing.
Yeah, keeps you young.
Yeah, absolutely. David, it's been just amazing to connect with you again. You are such a delight to talk to and learn from.
Leanne,
and thank you for sharing all of those tips, resources, activities. There's just so much practical stuff there. So thank you.
Thank you. I've really, really enjoyed. A great way to start the day, and the sun's out now.
Yeah, right on cue. Perfect.
There you go.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Leanne.